A frozen mummy is offering new insights into human history and geography.
High in the frozen silence of the Alps, a secret lay hidden for over 5,000 years. When hikers stumbled upon a leathery corpse in 1991, they had no idea they had just awakened a prehistoric ghost.
We didn't just discover the mummy, we found his clothes, his tools. All of this discovery is unique in the world.
One whose body, tools, and blood held answers to questions we hadn't yet learned to ask. This was no ordinary mummy. This was Ötzi, the Iceman. And decades later, scientists sequenced Ötzi the Iceman's DNA ancestry, and what was found shocked the world. The corpse in the ice. What began as a seemingly routine mountain hike on a crisp September day in 1991 quickly transformed into one of the most extraordinary archaeological discoveries of the modern era. Erica and Helmut Simon, a couple of seasoned hikers, were trekking through a rugged and remote pass in the Ötztal Alps, straddling the border between Austria and Italy. The air was thin, the terrain unforgiving, but the late summer sun had softened the glacier's grip just enough to reveal something utterly unexpected. Nestled within the melting ice, half exposed and eerily still, was the unmistakable form of a human body. At first glance, the Simons assumed they had stumbled upon the unfortunate remains of a recent climber lost to the unforgiving mountains. Yet, as they approached, subtle but striking differences became clear. The figure wasn't clad in the modern synthetic fabrics or equipped with typical climbing gear. Instead, the body wore thick leather shoes, ingeniously stuffed with grass, a primitive yet effective form of insulation. The hands grasped a copper axe, its greenish patina hinting at age beyond any known modern artifact. What was most astonishing was the state of preservation. This was no mere skeleton or decomposed remains. The flesh had turned leathery and dark, almost petrified, yet remarkably intact. The skin's texture and the overall condition defied the typical ravages of time, preserved by the unforgiving cold and ice of the glacier. The discovery set off an immediate chain reaction. Local authorities were alerted, and helicopters swiftly arrived to transport experts and archaeologists to the scene. What was initially a simple rescue turned into a full-scale investigation, the stakes raised by the uncanny preservation of the corpse. Within days, as carbon dating and forensic analysis commenced, the world was stunned to learn that this man had been frozen in time for more than 5,000 years. He belonged to the Copper Age, a period in human history long shrouded in mystery and legend. Dating back to around 3,300 BCE, they named him Ötzi, after the valley where he was found, a name that would soon become synonymous with ancient human history and archaeological wonder. Ötzi was not just a frozen relic. He was a living window into a forgotten era, a snapshot of human life during a pivotal moment in prehistory. But beyond the fascination with his age and preservation, deeper enigmas soon surfaced, suggesting that Ötzi's story was far from over. His death, it appeared, was not a peaceful passing, but the violent end of a man caught in circumstances we are only beginning to comprehend. Life and death in the Copper Age. At around 45 years old, Ötzi was no young man, especially for a time when life expectancy was brutally short. Yet, forensic evidence paints a picture of a man in the prime of his life, hardy and resilient. Standing at just 5 feet 3 inches tall, weighing about 110 pounds, he might have seemed slight by today's standards, but his bones told a tale of strength and endurance, forged by years of surviving in the harsh alpine environment. One of the most fascinating aspects of Ötzi's body was the 61 tattoos etched across his skin. These weren't ornamental or symbolic. Rather, they were therapeutic marks. Scientists believed they were deliberately placed near joints afflicted by arthritis or pain, perhaps an ancient form of acupuncture or medical treatment. It was a silent testament to his suffering and the rudimentary care methods practiced thousands of years ago. His clothing spoke volumes about his lifestyle and the resources available. Goat hide leggings shielded him from the cold and rough terrain, a bearskin cap protected his head, and a cloak woven from woven grass added an extra layer of insulation. These garments were meticulously crafted, each piece functional, designed for survival rather than fashion. Ötzi's equipment revealed an unexpected sophistication. He carried a flint knife with a finely worked handle, a yew longbow, and a copper axe, the latter of which astounded historians. The axe's copper blade was not only an advanced tool for the time, but also a weapon, evidence of emerging metallurgy that would soon revolutionize human technology.
This copper axe was not only an instrument, but also something very expensive at these days, and not everyone had one.
Yet, beneath the surface of this hunter and craftsman lay a darker truth. Forensic analysis uncovered wounds suggesting that Ötzi's last hours were far from peaceful.
He suffered of atherosclerosis, actually. So if he would not be maybe been shot by an arrowhead, he would have had a heart attack, actually.
His left hand bore a deep gash, indicating a desperate act of self-defense. His ribs showed bruising and possible fractures, evidence of a violent struggle. Blood from 4 other people was discovered on his belongings, hinting at the presence of others nearby in his final moments. Most chilling of all was the arrowhead lodged deep in his left shoulder, having severed a major artery. This fatal wound was not accidental, it was a violent act, a deliberate attempt to kill. Ötzi had bled out alone, high in the mountains, far from any help or allies. The implications were staggering. Ötzi was not a victim of nature or accident, but of human violence. Who had attacked him, and why? Was he a hunted man, a casualty of tribal conflict, or a scapegoat for some ancient dispute? The answers remained elusive, but one thing was certain. Ötzi's death was a murder, frozen in time. And that was just the beginning. The story of Ötzi, the Iceman, continues to unravel, revealing secrets not only about his life and death, but about humanity's long and complicated journey through history. This is terrifying. The realization that violence, betrayal, and survival struggles are as old as civilization itself, etched not just in stories, but in the very flesh of a man who died 5,000 years ago. The first DNA puzzle. For decades after Ötzi's discovery, scientists were relentless in their pursuit to understand this ancient man's life and origins. His body, remarkably preserved in the cold glacier, became a unique time capsule. Researchers examined everything they could, from the contents of his stomach to microscopic parasites living inside him. The revelation that his last meal consisted of dried ibex meat, einkorn wheat, and animal fat gave a rare glimpse into the Copper Age diet and survival strategies high in the Alpine mountains. The presence of whipworm parasites in his intestines pointed to the harsh realities of health and hygiene in that era, while traces of ash in his lungs suggested he had spent time near a wood fire shortly before his death, perhaps for warmth or cooking. Each detail was a thread, weaving a more vivid portrait of his final hours. Yet, it was the promise of his DNA that captured the imagination of the scientific community and the public alike. In 2012, after painstaking work to extract and sequence fragments of his ancient genetic code, scientists announced the completion of a draft genome, a rough but groundbreaking map of Ötzi's genetic material. The findings electrified the field. According to this initial analysis, Ötzi had light skin and brown eyes, features that challenged earlier assumptions based on his mummified remains. More startling was the discovery of steppe ancestry in his genome. This genetic signature, associated with Indo-European peoples who later expanded across Europe, was thought to have arrived in Central Europe centuries after Ötzi's time. Suddenly, it seemed Ötzi's existence pushed back the timeline of this migration by several hundred years, hinting at far earlier population movements than history had accounted for. The revelation sparked excitement, but also skepticism. Critics cautioned that the field of ancient DNA sequencing was still young, and contamination was a notorious challenge. Modern DNA from researchers or the environment could easily mingle with ancient samples, skewing results. Still, many experts stood by the sequencing data, proclaiming that Ötzi's genes were rewriting the prehistoric map of Europe. But this groundbreaking story soon took a dramatic turn. As more evidence emerged and techniques improved, the foundation of the original genome sequence began to crumble. What had been hailed as a revelation was now clouded in doubt. The reality was far more complicated and far more disturbing for the scientific narrative that had taken hold. A genome reborn. By 2023, the technology and methodologies for sequencing ancient DNA had made quantum leaps. The field was no longer the experimental frontier it had been a decade prior. It had matured into an exacting discipline with rigorous standards and safeguards against contamination. A new team of geneticists, including leading experts from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology and URAC Research, resolved to revisit Ötzi's DNA with fresh eyes and the most advanced tools available. Their goal was to sequence his entire genome anew, this time using fragments of bone taken from his hip, a dense area less susceptible to contamination and degradation. The process was meticulous. Extracting ancient DNA is like assembling a puzzle from dust. Fragments are tiny, damaged, and vulnerable. Every step required precision and extreme care to avoid modern genetic interference. When the new sequence data finally emerged, it was nothing short of a revelation. The hallmark finding of steppe ancestry that had caused such excitement was nowhere to be found. The earlier conclusions, it turned out, had been the result of modern DNA contamination, masquerading as ancient heritage. The real genome painted a very different picture of Ötzi, one that contradicted the previous narrative. "This is terrifying," one researcher reportedly confessed as they pored over the data in stunned disbelief. The statement reverberated across the field. "We've misunderstood this man for over a decade." This was more than a correction. It was a profound upheaval in our understanding of prehistoric Europe. The mythic figure of Ötzi, once thought to be a genetic bridge between ancient and Indo-European populations, was now revealed as something entirely else. His true genetic identity, stripped of contamination, challenged long-held assumptions about migration, ancestry, and the very roots of European civilization. The painstaking work to peel back layers of error and bias revealed not only the fragility of ancient DNA research, but also the dangers of rushing to conclusions in science. Ötzi's story had been rewritten, not with fresh discovery, but with the sobering clarity of caution and rigorous re-examination. What had been hailed as groundbreaking was, in truth, a reminder of how easily even the most exciting scientific breakthroughs can mislead. The Anatolian farmer connection. The revelations from the new DNA sequencing marked a turning point in how we understood Ötzi's origins, and by extension, the broader story of prehistoric Europe. For decades, the image of Ötzi had been built on fragmented archaeological clues and assumptions, shaped by modern European populations. But the genetic data now revealed a far more complex and surprising ancestry. Over 92% of Ötzi's genetic makeup traced back to Neolithic Anatolian farmers, the ancient peoples who had migrated from the region we now call Turkey into Europe roughly 8,000 years ago. These pioneering groups weren't just any ordinary wanderers, they were the bearers of a profound cultural and technological transformation. They brought agriculture, domesticated plants and animals that would forever alter human society. Alongside this agricultural revolution came pottery, new tools, and the establishment of permanent settlements, signaling a shift from nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyles to the first villages and early forms of civilization. In stark contrast, a mere 8% of Ötzi's genome came from the local hunter-gatherer populations who had lived in Europe long before the arrival of these farmers. This minority contribution highlighted something remarkable. Ötzi's ancestors had settled in Europe early and then remained genetically isolated from the dramatic population, upheavals and migrations that shaped much of the continent's later genetic landscape. The implications of this were staggering. Rather than being a direct genetic ancestor or bridge to modern Europeans, Ötzi represented a nearly lost lineage, one almost wiped away by waves of subsequent migrations and mixing. His DNA was a time capsule preserving the genetic signature of those early Anatolian farmers, largely untouched by later genetic influences.
Ötzi's DNA reveals that he was not an ancestor of modern Europeans, but a representative of a nearly lost lineage of ancient Anatolian farmers.
Even more unexpected was the discovery of Ötzi's closest living genetic relatives. One might assume that modern populations in Austria or northern Italy, the regions closest to where Ötzi was found, would share his lineage. Yet this was not the case. Instead, his closest genetic kin are found on the island of Sardinia in the Mediterranean. The Sardinians, known for their genetic uniqueness, trace much of their ancestry to these same Neolithic farmers, and, due to geographic isolation, avoided many of the later waves of population mixing that swept across mainland Europe. This paints a profound picture. Ötzi wasn't a genetic forefather of modern Central Europeans, but rather a member of a population branch that nearly vanished, a genetic dead end. His lineage, once widespread, was almost completely erased over millennia, surviving only in pockets like Sardinia. The real face of the Iceman. The image of Ötzi that had taken hold in public imagination, pale-skinned, light-eyed, with thick brown hair, had been comforting and familiar, aligning neatly with Eurocentric narratives of prehistoric Europe. Museums displayed reconstructions based on these assumptions, and documentaries propagated this image worldwide. However, the groundbreaking study published in 2023 dismantled this long-held view. Through a combination of advanced genetic analysis and forensic reconstruction techniques, scientists unveiled a radically different appearance for Ötzi. Contrary to popular belief, Ötzi had dark skin, significantly darker than most modern Europeans, possibly even darker than many Sicilians today. This detail alone challenged assumptions about the ancient European complexion and the gradual lightening of skin tones. His eyes were brown, not the often assumed blue, and he exhibited a noticeable lack of hair. But this wasn't simply due to the natural decay of millennia frozen in ice. Rather, the genetic markers showed he was balding, a condition encoded on his X chromosome, revealing an intimate and humanizing detail rarely accessible in ancient remains. These revelations force us to reconsider how we visualize prehistoric peoples, especially when filtered through modern biases and expectations. The artistic reconstructions, though crafted with the best intentions and available data at the time, were ultimately wrong. They reflected not the true visage of Ötzi, but the assumptions and cultural lenses of those who made them. For many, this realization was unsettling. To confront the face of Europe's oldest mummy and see someone so different from the white, light-eyed figures often imagined was to challenge deeply ingrained narratives about race, ancestry, and history. This is terrifying in its way, a reminder that science is indifferent to the stories we want to believe. It uncovers facts with no concern for comfort or convenience. Ötzi's face, emerging from the past in all its unexpected truth, is a wake-up call. It urges us to shed our assumptions and embrace a more complex, more honest understanding of human history, one that acknowledges diversity, migration, and change far earlier and in more profound ways than we had ever imagined. A body of disease. Ötzi's body was far more than just a frozen time capsule or an archaeological curiosity. It was a living, breathing testament to the harsh realities of life over 5,000 years ago. When scientists finally unraveled the secrets hidden within his remarkably preserved remains, they discovered a complex and troubling portrait of human frailty. His genome revealed mutations associated with a suite of chronic illnesses that plague us today: heart disease, type 2 diabetes, lactose intolerance, arthritis, and obesity. These weren't just modern ailments. They were already deeply embedded in the DNA of a man who lived during the Copper Age. In addition to these genetic predispositions, Ötzi's body bore the scars of real physical suffering. He suffered from painful ulcers, battled gallstones, and had become infected with Lyme disease, making him the oldest known human ever identified with this tick-borne illness. Inside his intestines, parasites crawled, further weakening an already fragile system. Pathogens coursed through his blood, silently eroding his strength. Signs of aging and chronic inflammation were evident, suggesting that by the time of his violent death, Ötzi was not the invincible mountain hunter he might have seemed at first glance, but a man burdened by pain and exhaustion. His skin, tattooed with therapeutic markings, hinted at his attempts to cope with the relentless grip of arthritis. In every way, Ötzi was a body breaking down, a poignant mirror of human vulnerability that transcends millennia. What is especially haunting is how closely his genetic profile echoes our own. The diseases that modern medicine struggles to combat, those tangled webs of clogged arteries and metabolic disorders, were already quietly taking root in the distant past. This shatters any comforting illusions that ancient times were healthier or simpler. The truth is far more sobering. Life then was brutal, raw, and unforgiving, just as it often is now. The past was no sanctuary of purity or cleanliness, but a place where chronic suffering was an everyday reality, and the battle to survive never ceased. A genetic island. As researchers delved deeper into the genetic makeup of Ötzi, a puzzling question emerged. Why was his ancestry so remarkably pure, so strikingly isolated from the swirling tides of migration and mixing that reshaped Europe? The answer lies in a glimpse of prehistoric social dynamics and geography. New evidence suggests that Ötzi belonged to a small, insular community, an enclave cut off by rugged mountain terrain and cultural boundaries from the vast currents of gene flow sweeping across the continent. This group, nestled high in the Alpine valleys, had maintained a genetic and cultural identity that remained largely untouched by the incoming tribes and peoples who transformed the European landscape during the Neolithic and Bronze Ages. Their bloodline bore the signature of Neolithic Anatolian farmers, unblurred by the steppe herders and hunter-gatherers mixing elsewhere. They were, in essence, a genetic island, mountain dwellers fiercely holding on to traditions, lifestyles, and genes that were rapidly changing all around them. But such isolation came with profound consequences. In the absence of fresh genetic diversity, harmful mutations and vulnerabilities could accumulate unchecked. Diseases that might have been diluted or eliminated through mixing instead became concentrated, passed down through generations like a hidden inheritance of weakness. Immunity waned, and resilience faltered. Ötzi, in his frozen remains, offers a rare and unsettling snapshot of what happens when a lineage is confined for too long, when survival depends on a shrinking gene pool that cannot refresh itself. This isolation wasn't sustainable. The lineage that Ötzi represented did not endure beyond his time. It was a living bottleneck, a final echo of a people clinging to a fragile existence before the sweeping forces of migration, conquest, and cultural transformation reshaped Europe irreversibly. In the end, Ötzi's genetic island was swallowed by the tide of history, and with it, a unique chapter of humanity quietly vanished. The final hours. Ötzi's last hours were allegedly a whirlwind of confusion, pain, and desperate struggle, a silent drama played out high in the Alpine mountains, hidden beneath layers of ice for over 5 millennia. The evidence carved into his body tells a story far from peaceful or ordinary. In the days before his death, he probably journeyed across rugged, mountainous terrain, traversing miles on foot through harsh and unforgiving landscapes. His movements were purposeful but strained, as if he was fleeing or being pursued. His food remains indicate he ate 2 substantial meals shortly before his demise, suggesting he was preparing for a long journey or recovering strength. Among his possessions were allegedly weapons, carefully maintained and freshly repaired, which he carried close as a means of defense or survival. Yet despite these precautions, he was not alone. He was allegedly being watched, hunted, or perhaps betrayed. The fatal wound was a cruel and precise attack from behind, an arrow shot that struck him in the left shoulder. The shaft of the arrow had been deliberately removed, leaving only the arrowhead embedded deep within the muscle.